The man bleeding onto my pharmacy floor looked less dangerous than the people hunting him. I realized that exactly 11 seconds before the Devil of New York walked through the front door. Snow slammed against the windows of Hartwell Pharmacy hard enough to rattle the old glass. Outside, Queens looked washed in dirty white and ambulance lights. Inside, the heater near aisle 4 clicked like it was dying. Again. I rubbed my eyes and checked the clock above the cigarettes behind the counter. 2:12 in the morning. 14 hours into my shift. My feet hurt. My head hurt. And I still had not figured out how I was going to help my sister pay for her son's asthma medication this month. The front bell chimed. I barely looked up at first. Most late-night customers wanted cold medicine, energy drinks, or pregnancy tests they were too embarrassed to buy during daylight. But then I saw the blood. The man stumbled against the automatic doors before they finished opening. Tall. Mid-40s maybe. Gray hoodie soaked dark along one side. His breathing sounded wrong. Vet somehow. Please, he said quietly. Do not call anyone. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to hit the panic button under the register. Instead, I walked around the counter and caught him before he hit the floor. His body weight nearly dragged me down with him. Sir, you need a hospital. No hospitals. His hand grabbed my sleeve hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. Not violent. Desperate. I smelled snow, sweat, and metal from the blood drying on his clothes. If they find me first, he whispered, I am dead. I should have walked away. That is the truth. People like me do not survive by getting involved in strange men bleeding through hoodies at 2 in the morning. But then he looked up at me, exhausted and terrified, and I saw something I recognized too well. Someone who already believed nobody was coming to help him. So I lied to myself the way people always do before their lives fall apart. Just this once. I locked the front doors early and helped him toward the back storage room beside the pharmacy refrigerator. My apartment sat upstairs above the laundromat next door. Tiny kitchen. Broken. Heater. Water stains on the ceiling. Nothing worth destroying. But somehow I already knew that was exactly where this night was heading. Sit down, I told him, grabbing gauze from the emergency cabinet. And if you die on my floor, I am going to be extremely annoyed. He actually laughed once at that. Weak and tired. Maris Bennett, he said, reading my name tag. You are making a mistake. Yeah, I muttered. That part feels obvious. Then headlights flooded the front windows. Not one car. 3. Black SUVs rolled silently through the snow and stopped outside the pharmacy. My stomach dropped so fast it physically hurt. The injured man's face lost all color. Turn off the lights, he whispered. Too late. The front bell chimed again. Slow footsteps crossed the tile floor. Calm. Measured. Expensive shoes against cheap linoleum. I stepped out from the back room just as the tallest man I had ever seen removed his leather gloves near the cold medicine aisle. Dark wool coat dusted with snow. Silver lighter turning once between his fingers. The entire pharmacy suddenly felt too small for him. Ronan Vale looked at me with the kind of stillness that made normal people nervous without understanding why. The Devil of New York did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Good evening, he said softly. Has anyone unusual been here tonight? For one horrible second I thought he already knew. My throat tightened so fast I could barely breathe. Ronan Vale stood near the cough syrup aisle with melting snow darkening the shoulders of his black coat, while 2 men remained behind him near the entrance. Neither moved. Neither needed to. The entire pharmacy felt held together by the sound of the old refrigerator humming behind the counter.
No, iyan suarat karafuli.
Just regular customers. Ronan watched me the way surgeons probably watched heart monitors. Quiet. Precise. Looking for the moment something failed. You seem nervous. It is 2 in the morning, I said. Everybody here is nervous. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not a smile. More like he appreciated the attempt. He stepped closer to the counter, eyes drifting across the shelves behind me. Pain relievers. Cold medicine. Cheap candy bars. Ordinary things. Somehow that made him feel more dangerous standing there among them. Like violence had accidentally wandered into normal life. You work alone? He asked. Most nights. That is not safe. The answer caught me off guard enough that I looked up too quickly. His voice had not changed, but something about the sentence felt genuine. Not flirtation. Not manipulation. Observation. New York is expensive, I replied. People work where they can. His gaze dropped briefly to my hands. Dry skin. Ink stain near my thumb from inventory reports. A small burn on my wrist from the coffee machine upstairs. Tiny details nobody usually noticed. Then his eyes shifted toward the back hallway leading to storage. My pulse stumbled hard enough I thought he might actually hear it. Behind that door, Elias sat bleeding onto a folding chair with my emergency blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Ronan tilted his head slightly. What is back there? Storage. May I? Every instinct in my body screamed no. But saying no too fast would be worse. People lied hardest when they were afraid. I learned that years ago watching my father deny everything right before police lights filled our apartment windows. Sure, I said finally, forcing my voice steady. But unless you are looking for expired allergy medicine, it is pretty disappointing. One of the men near the door moved immediately. Ronan lifted a hand without looking back. The man stopped. That tiny gesture told me everything. Nobody here made decisions except him. Ronan walked toward the hallway slowly, his footsteps soft against the tile. My entire body locked tight with panic. I imagined Elias upstairs somehow making noise, coughing, falling, dying at the worst possible moment. Ronan stopped beside the storage door. His fingers brushed the metal handle once. Then his phone rang. Sharp. Sudden. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. He answered without taking his eyes off me. Talk. Silence stretched while someone spoke on the other end. I watched something cold settle deeper into his expression. Where? He asked quietly. Another pause. No. Do not touch him until I get there. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. Then he looked at me again. Calm. Controlled. Terrifyingly unreadable. There has been a development, he said. Looks like your night just improved. Mine definitely had not. Ronan reached into his coat and placed something on the counter beside the register. A business card. Thick black paper. Silver lettering. No title. Just his name and a phone number. If anyone unusual does come through here, he said softly, you call me before you call the police. Why would I call you? Another almost smile. This one sad somehow. Tired around the edges. Because the police cannot protect you from the kind of men looking for him. Him. Not them. Him. My stomach turned cold. He knew exactly who he was hunting. Ronan turned toward the door, his men immediately following behind him. Snow rushed through the entrance as it opened. But before stepping outside, he paused without looking back. Lock your doors tonight, Maris Bennett. Then he disappeared into the storm while upstairs, hidden above a laundromat with broken dryers and flickering lights. The enemy of the devil of New York tried not to bleed to death in my apartment. The strangest part was that after Ronan Vale left, I could still feel him in the room. Not emotionally. Physically. Like the air inside Hartwell Pharmacy had adjusted itself around his presence and forgotten how to settle back afterward. I locked the front doors with shaking hands and turned off half the lights to save electricity. The silence afterward felt enormous. Upstairs, Elias sat at my tiny kitchen table wearing one of my old hoodies, because his sweatshirt had too much blood on it to keep pretending this situation was temporary. The radiator beside the sink clanged every 30 seconds like it was trying to escape the wall. You lied to him, Elias said quietly as I handed him antibiotics and a glass of water. Yeah. That was not smart. I laughed once under my breath while opening a can of tomato soup. You seem confused about something. I am not doing this because I am smart. Snow tapped softly against the apartment window over the fire escape. Somewhere downstairs, dryers rumbled inside the laundromat beneath us. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. But my nerves still felt stretched too tight under my skin. Elias watched me carefully while I moved around the kitchen. You know who he is? Everybody knows who he is. No, he said. They know the stories. I stirred the soup without answering. I did not want stories. Stories were how people stopped seeing danger clearly. Ronan Vale did not feel like a myth to me. He felt worse. Real. Elias leaned back slowly, pain tightening across his face for half a second before he hit it again. You know what makes him dangerous? I am guessing you are about to tell me. He remembers everything. That landed harder than I expected, because I had already noticed it too. The way Ronan looked at details instead of surfaces. My burned wrist. The inventory stains on my fingers. The exhaustion under my eyes. Most powerful men look through people. Ronan Vale looked directly at them. You worked for him? I asked finally. Elias gave a tired smile. Worked against him. That sounds healthier. Not really. I carried the soup over and set it down in front of him. His hand shook slightly, picking up the spoon. Fever. Exhaustion. Fear. He looked less like some criminal mastermind and more like every overworked man I saw grabbing antacids at 3 in the morning. If he catches you, I said carefully, what happens? Elias looked at the steam rising from the soup instead of at me. Depends which version of Ronan finds me. Before I could ask what that meant, my phone buzzed across the table. Tessa. My sister. I answered immediately because calls after midnight usually meant her son could not breathe again. Hey. Sorry, she whispered. I could hear hospital machines faintly in the background. Owen had another asthma attack. My chest tightened instantly. Is he okay? He is stable now. Stable. The word people used when they wanted you calm before the bills arrived. I closed my eyes briefly. I will come in the morning. Maris, you already worked all night. I know. Tessa went quiet for a second. You sound tired. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked around my apartment at the bleeding fugitive eating soup beside unpaid electric bills while the most feared man in New York probably searched half the city below us. You have no idea. After we hung up, I sat heavily at the table and rubbed my forehead. Elias studied me for a long moment. You should not destroy your life for strangers. That is funny coming from the man hiding in my apartment. I am serious. He coughed hard into his sleeve before continuing. Ronan does not forgive betrayal. I did not betray him. Elias looked at me with something close to pity. Not yet. Then, somewhere downstairs beneath the sound of dryers turning and pipes rattling through old walls, I heard a car door close outside the building. Heavy. Expensive. Followed by footsteps that did not belong to anyone living here. At 6:30 that morning, my landlord taped an eviction warning to my apartment door while a wanted man slept 10 feet away on my couch. I stared at the paper for a full minute before ripping it down. Final notice. Rent overdue by 19 days. I folded it automatically and shoved it into my hoodie pocket just as Mrs. Delgado from apartment 4 shuffled past carrying laundry detergent and giving me the tired look people in this building reserved for neighbors slowly falling apart. You need sleep, sweetheart, she muttered. You look pale. That is the dream. She shook her head and disappeared downstairs while I unlocked my door quietly. Inside, the apartment smelled like instant coffee and rubbing alcohol. Elias was awake now, sitting at the kitchen table with reading glasses low on his nose while flipping through an old newspaper someone had left downstairs. The image looked strangely normal. Too normal for a man half of New York apparently wanted dead. You have food? He asked without looking up. You are lucky I have oxygen. I dropped a grocery bag onto the counter. Discount bread. Eggs. Cheap soup. Whatever I could buy after helping Tessa cover Owen's emergency inhaler refill at the hospital pharmacy 2 hours earlier. My bank account had exactly $83 left until payday. Maybe less after utilities cleared. Elias noticed the hospital wristband still hanging loosely around my arm. Family. My nephew. He okay? Depends how expensive breathing keeps getting. I regretted the bitterness immediately, but exhaustion had sanded down my ability to pretend everything was fine. Elias folded the newspaper slowly. You should not be carrying everybody. Somebody has to. That answer came out too fast. Too defensive. Because the truth was I had been carrying people since I was 14 years old and too scared to let anything drop. Bills. Crises. Family. Broken men bleeding through hoodies at 2 in the morning. I opened the refrigerator and stared at almost nothing inside. Half a gallon of milk. Mustard packets. A leftover container of rice. The kind of fridge that quietly embarrassed you when other people saw it. Ronan was right about one thing, Elias said suddenly. I froze slightly at the sound of his name. What thing? You should not work alone at night. You sound weirdly concerned for someone hiding from him. Elias leaned back carefully, one hand pressed against his healing side. Concern and fear are cousins. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Hartwell Pharmacy. I already knew it would be bad before answering. Maris, my manager snapped immediately. Why was the security footage from last night corrupted? My stomach dropped hard. What? Corporate flagged missing footage between 1:50 and 2:30 a.m. IT says the system was manually disabled. I looked toward Elias slowly. He avoided my eyes. I did not touch your cameras, he said quietly. My manager continued talking over the phone. And there is another issue. DA inventory flagged missing pain medication from last month. We need everyone in for audit review tomorrow. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. One more problem balanced on top of every other problem crushing my life. I will be there, I said weakly. You better, he replied. Because corporate already thinks this location is a liability. The line disconnected. I stood there staring at the dark phone screen while panic crawled slowly up my spine. If they audited the pharmacy properly, they would pull security logs, delivery records, visitor timestamps, maybe even police involvement if things got worse. My apartment suddenly felt too small to hold all these secrets. Elias watched me carefully across the room. You should leave this alone while you still can. I laughed quietly, exhausted beyond humor. You keep saying that like my life was stable before you arrived. A heavy silence settled between us. Outside, snowplows scraped loudly down the street. Someone downstairs argued in Spanish near the laundromat dryers. Ordinary life kept moving while mine twisted further out of control by the hour. Then Elias spoke again, softer this time. Ronan is not hunting me because I stole money. Then why? He looked toward the apartment window where gray winter light barely pushed through the glass. Because I know what really happened to his brother. The first time Ronan Vale came back to the pharmacy, he bought a pack of bandages he clearly did not need and stood silently near the register while I tried not to panic. It was 3 nights after Elias told me about Ronan's brother. 3 nights of sleeping badly, lying to my manager during inventory review, and pretending my life had not become one long bad decision stitched together with exhaustion. Hartwell Pharmacy smelled like floor cleaner, and overheated plastic from the ancient fluorescent lights buzzing above aisle 7. I was restocking children's cough syrup when the front bell chimed. My body reacted before my brain did. Shoulders tight. Breath caught. Heart racing. Ronan walked in alone this time wearing a charcoal peacoat instead of the expensive black wool from before. Snow melted slowly from his dark hair onto the collar. He looked tired. Not movie star tired. Real tired. The kind that sat behind the eyes and never really left. You are becoming a regular, I said carefully. That sounds dangerously close to customer loyalty. His mouth moved slightly at that. Do I get a rewards card? Only if you survive 5 visits. He set the bandages on the counter while I scanned them. Silence stretched between us, but strangely it no longer felt sharp. More like standing too close to a power line and slowly getting used to the hum. You work every night? He asked. Most. That is unhealthy. Being alive is unhealthy lately. That earned me an actual quiet exhale from him. Not quite laughter. Close enough to surprise me. Then his gaze shifted toward the dark circles under my eyes. You have not slept. You say that like sleep is free. I regretted the honesty immediately, but something about him made small lies feel pointless. Ronan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out cash, and placed far too much money beside the register. That is not the price, I said. Keep the change. This is like $80. Then your heater can stop making that terrible sound. My stomach tightened instantly. What? He looked mildly confused by my reaction. The radiator above your pharmacy office. It sounds like a dying engine. I stared at him. You heard that. The entire building heard that. But that was not what unsettled me. He remembered. Out of everything happening in his world, he noticed a broken heater in a struggling pharmacy. Before I could answer, the front doors opened again. 2 men entered loudly wearing construction jackets dusted with drywall. One smelled heavily like beer. The other immediately noticed me and smiled in the way women learn to dislike very early in life. Hey, sweetheart, he said while approaching the counter. You work here every night? Ronan went completely still beside me. The man leaned casually against the counter. I see you when I grab smokes after shifts sometimes. Thought maybe one night you could give me your number instead. I forced a polite smile. I am working. That is not a no. It is New York, I replied. Everything is a no. His friend laughed loudly, but the first man stayed there another second too long, eyes lingering across my face before finally grabbing cigarettes and paying. The second they left, the tension inside the pharmacy changed. Ronan stared toward the doors with an expression so unreadable it unsettled me more than anger would have. You should not walk home alone, he said quietly. I live upstairs. That does not make it safer. I crossed my arms. You cannot glare at every guy who annoys me. I was not glaring. Really? His eyes met mine finally. Cold gray. Exhausted. Careful. Maris, he said softly. You would know if I was glaring. The way he said it sent a strange shiver through me. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Awareness that underneath the calm voice and expensive coat lived something dangerous enough that people built stories around it. Then his phone buzzed. I watched the warmth disappear from his expression instantly. Ronan answered without looking away from me. What happened? Silence. Then his jaw tightened once. Where? Another pause. No. Nobody touches him until I get there. He ended the call and slipped the phone away. What now? I asked quietly before I could stop myself. For a second he looked almost surprised I cared enough to ask. Then he glanced toward the pharmacy windows where police lights suddenly flashed blue and red across the snowy street outside. Looks like, he said softly, someone found one of my men. The body they found belonged to a 19-year-old delivery driver who had unknowingly brought antibiotics to my apartment 2 nights earlier. I learned that 12 hours after Ronan walked out of the pharmacy and left me standing beneath flickering fluorescent lights with a feeling I could not shake from my chest. His name was Luis Ortega. I recognized him immediately from the news photo on the tiny television hanging near the pharmacy break room. Bright smile.
Yang kas capítol.
Kid looked too young to already be dead. Police suspect gang involvement. The anchor reported while customers wandered aisles buying cold medicine and lottery tickets like the world had not just tilted sideways. I stared at the screen until my manager snapped his fingers near my face. Maris. I blinked hard. Sorry. Inventory discrepancy. Focus. Right. The audit. 3 district supervisors stood around the pharmacy office digging through paperwork, while I tried not to look guilty about things they did not even know existed yet. Missing oxycodone counts. Corrupted security footage. Corporate liability reports. My entire life suddenly felt one bad minute away from collapsing. You are distracted lately, my manager muttered while signing forms. If there is something going on outside work, fix it fast. Outside work. Almost laughed at that. Upstairs, Elias was hiding under my roof while people connected to him started dying. Downstairs, I was one pharmacy inspection away from losing the only stable thing left in my life. And somewhere in the middle of all that sat Ronan Vale, quietly moving closer to becoming a problem I could no longer pretend was temporary. My shift ended after dark. The subway station near Queens Boulevard smelled like wet concrete and burnt pretzels from the vendor outside the entrance. I stood on the platform rubbing exhaustion from my eyes while commuters packed around me in heavy winter coats. Everybody looked tired. Everybody looked like they had somewhere difficult to return to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Hello. You should not take the train tonight. Ronan's voice settled low through the speaker, calm as ever. My pulse reacted instantly anyway. How did you get this number? That is your concern? It is definitely on the list. A pause. I could hear traffic faintly behind him. Go upstairs, he said quietly. Lock your apartment door. Do not stop anywhere first. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. Why? Because Luis Ortega was beaten to death this afternoon. The station noise around me suddenly sounded far away. What does that have to do with me? Silence stretched for half a second too long. They found your pharmacy receipt in his jacket pocket. My stomach dropped so hard I grabbed the subway pole beside me. What? Somebody is tracing movement around Elias. Hearing the name spoken out loud in public made panic flare hot through my chest. I lowered my voice immediately. Do not say his name. Then stop protecting him. Anger cut through my fear instantly. A kid is dead. I know. His voice changed slightly on those two words. Still controlled, but heavier somehow. Tired in a way I had not heard before. That is why I am calling instead of sending someone. The train roared into the station, metal screaming against metal, but I stayed frozen on the platform. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. No, another pause. I am trying very hard not to. The honesty of that unsettled me more than anger would have, because for the first time since meeting Ronanvale, I realized something dangerous. He was not calling because he suspected me anymore. He was calling because he was worried someone else already had. By the time I reached my apartment building, 2 police officers were standing outside the laundromat talking to my landlord. My pulse stumbled so hard I nearly turned around and walked straight back into the subway station. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered loosely near the curb where a dark stain marked the snow beside the sidewalk. Somebody had already tried cleaning it. Not well enough. What happened? I asked carefully while climbing the steps toward the entrance. Mrs. Delgado stood near the dryers wringing her hands nervously. Some boy got jumped out here an hour ago, she whispered. Poor thing could barely stand. My stomach turned cold immediately. Was he okay? She gave me the kind of look people use when they already know the answer. Upstairs, I locked the apartment door fast enough to wake Elias from the couch. He sat upright instantly, still pale but steadier than before. What is wrong? Somebody was attacked outside. His expression darkened immediately. Because of me? I do not know. But I did know. Maybe not logically. Maybe not completely. But deep down, I already understood the pattern forming around us. People connected to Elias kept getting hurt. And now violence had reached my building. The place where children rode scooters through the hallway and old women traded soup recipes near the mailboxes. I paced the apartment once, exhaustion and adrenaline twisting together under my skin. You need to leave. Elias looked at me carefully. Maris. No, I pointed toward the window overlooking the alley behind the laundromat. You were right. I cannot keep carrying this. The words hurt more than I expected because they sounded too close to things my mother used to say before disappearing into another double shift at the diner. Everybody leaves eventually when the weight gets too heavy. Elias studied me for a long moment before nodding once. No anger. No argument. Somehow that made me feel worse. Okay, he said quietly. I know a place in Red Hook. Guilt punched through me instantly, because I did not actually want him gone. I wanted this entire situation to stop demanding impossible choices from me. Before I could answer, someone knocked at the apartment door. 3 slow knocks. Calm. Measured. Every muscle in Elias's body locked instantly. Mine did too. Nobody moved. The knock came again. Not louder. Worse somehow because of how patient it sounded. Then a familiar voice drifted through the door. Maris. Ronan. Elias stood too quickly, pain flashing across his face. Do not open it. You think I do not know that? Another knock. I can hear both of you breathing, Ronan said softly from the hallway. Silence crushed the room. My mind raced uselessly. There was no back exit. No escape ladder. Nothing except 20 feet of cheap apartment separating 2 men who clearly wanted very different versions of the truth. Maris, Ronan said again, quieter this time. Open the door before somebody else in this building gets hurt. That did it. Not the threat. The exhaustion in his voice. Like he was already carrying the consequences of tonight on his shoulders too. Elias stepped closer to me carefully. If he finds me here, he will never trust you again. I stared at him in disbelief. That is your concern right now? It should be yours. Because he was right. Somehow terrifyingly, he was right. Over the past week, Ronan had started looking at me differently. Less like a witness. More like someone standing dangerously close to becoming important. And I hated that part of me noticed it at all. Another soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Maris. This time my name sounded almost tired. I closed my eyes briefly, then walked toward the door before I could lose my nerve. Elias grabbed my wrist once. Whatever he tells you about Micah Vale, he whispered. Remember this. Ronan was not the only brother who lost somebody. Then I opened the door. Ronan stood there alone beneath the flickering hallway light with snow melting slowly across the shoulders of his dark coat. His gray eyes moved from my face to the apartment behind me. And for the first time since meeting him, I saw genuine hurt break through the control. Ronan did not look past me right away. That somehow made it worse. Snow melted slowly from his hair onto the hallway carpet, while he stood there studying my face like he was trying to solve something painful in real time. You lied to me, he said quietly. No anger. No raised voice. Just certainty. Behind me, Elias stayed silent near the kitchen table. The apartment suddenly felt impossibly small. Pipes rattled inside the walls. A baby cried somewhere down the hall. Real life kept happening while mine came apart one sentence at a time. Ronan, I started. Do not. The softness in his voice cut deeper than shouting would have. He stepped inside slowly and closed the apartment door behind him with one hand. No dramatic threats. No guards storming in. Just 3 exhausted people standing inside a cramped apartment above a laundromat at nearly midnight. Ronan's eyes finally shifted past me toward Elias. Everything inside his expression hardened instantly. You. Elias pushed himself upright carefully, still weak from the injury. You look tired. Ronan ignored that completely. How long has he been here? I swallowed hard. Since the night he came into the pharmacy. A full silence followed. Heavy enough I could hear the old refrigerator motor buzzing in the kitchen corner. Then Ronan nodded once to himself like something finally made sense. That is why you were shaking the first night. I hated that he remembered that. Hated that part of me noticed he remembered. Luis Ortega is dead because people tracked movement around this building, Ronan said quietly. One of my drivers was attacked outside tonight. And you still chose to hide him. Guilt crashed through me so hard I almost looked away. But Maris Bennett did not run from ugly truths. That was the problem. I did not know people would get hurt. People always get hurt. His voice sharpened slightly for the first time. Not loud. Worse because it sounded restrained. Controlled too tightly. That is what happens when civilians involve themselves in wars they do not understand. Anger flared hot through my exhaustion. Then maybe stop bringing wars into neighborhoods where regular people live. The second the words left my mouth, silence slammed into the room again. Elias closed his eyes briefly like he already knew this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. Ronan stared at me with something unreadable moving behind his gray eyes. Hurt. Frustration. Maybe both. You think I want this near you? He asked quietly. I think you are used to deciding what destruction is acceptable. That landed. I saw it physically in the way his jaw tightened once. Maris, Elias warned softly. But I was too exhausted to stop now. You walk into places like this and everybody gets scared because they know violence follows you. Violence followed him first. Ronan pointed toward Elias without looking away from me. You are protecting a man who destroyed lives. Including yours? I asked. Ronan went still. Truly still this time. Then Elias spoke from behind me. Tell her what happened to Micah. Ronan's expression changed instantly. Cold fury. Not explosive. Controlled enough to terrify me. You do not get to say his name. She deserves the truth. The truth. Ronan laughed once under his breath, empty and exhausted. You sold information that got my brother killed. I tried to stop it. After taking money from the people planning it. The room cracked open right there. Not because of screaming. Because both men sounded genuinely devastated in completely different ways. Elias looked older suddenly. Micah was supposed to leave that night, he said quietly. I warned him. Too late. Ronan's voice dropped lower. Always too late. I looked between them, realizing for the first time this was not really about business or territory or revenge anymore. This was grief that had rotted into something poisonous over years. And somehow I had stepped directly into the center of it. Then a loud crash exploded downstairs beneath the apartment. Everybody froze instantly. Another crash followed. Glass breaking this time. Followed by shouting near the laundromat entrance. Ronan turned toward the window sharply while Elias went pale. My stomach dropped. Because deep down, before anybody said a word, I already knew the war had finally reached my building. The laundromat. Downstairs looked like a storm had ripped through it. One of the front windows was shattered across the tile floor. Soap and broken glass mixed together beneath flashing police lights outside, while tenants crowded the sidewalk in winter coats and slippers. Mrs. Delgado stood near the dryers crying quietly while officers took statements nobody really wanted to give. Some guys came asking questions, my landlord muttered angrily as we pushed through the crowd. Started throwing things around when nobody answered fast enough. My stomach twisted violently. Ronan scanned the damage with terrifying calm beside me while Elias stayed hidden upstairs. Did anybody get hurt? I asked immediately. Teenage kid from 3B got hit trying to stop them. The landlord snapped. Needed stitches. Guilt hit so hard I physically swayed. Ronan noticed instantly. His hand touched my elbow for half a second to steady me before he pulled it away again like he regretted doing it. This is why I told you to stay out of it, he said quietly. I stared at the broken laundromat window instead of at him. You think I do not understand that now? Understanding it after people bleed does not help much. The words should have sounded cruel. Instead they sounded exhausted. Like a man who had watched consequences arrive too many times to romanticize any of this anymore. Upstairs, Elias stood near the apartment window watching police lights reflect across the alley. Nolan Pike, he said immediately when we returned. This feels like him. Ronan removed his gloves slowly. You are not important enough for Nolan. Maris is. The room went silent. I looked between them confused. Ronan's jaw tightened once. What does that mean? Elias met my eyes first, not Ronan's. Nolan knows Ronan has been seen here. Cold settled hard into my chest. What? Your pharmacy cameras were not corrupted randomly, Elias continued quietly. People are tracking movement around Ronan now, because somebody inside his organization has been leaking information. Ronan stared at him carefully. Dangerous stillness settling into his posture again. Who? I do not know yet. Convenient. Elias ignored the insult. Nolan does not need proof you matter to Ronan. He just needs suspicion. I looked at Ronan immediately. That is ridiculous. But even saying it felt weaker than I wanted it to, because people had already gotten hurt simply for standing near me. Ronan said nothing for several long seconds. Then he looked toward the apartment door. Pack a bag. I blinked. What? You cannot stay here tonight. I am not leaving my home. Maris. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made my own frustration sharper. No, Isnapat. You do not get to walk into my life and start making decisions because things got complicated. Something flickered briefly across his face. Not anger. Something more tired than that. Complicated, he repeated softly. A teenager needed stitches downstairs because men came looking for somebody under your roof. The truth landed hard because he was right. Again. I hated that he was right so often lately. If I leave, I said quietly, people in this building will know something is wrong. Ronan looked around the apartment once. Cheap furniture. Bills stacked beside the microwave. The old radiator rattling like loose bones in the wall. He saw all of it. Something is already wrong. I crossed my arms tightly. And what happens if I go with you? You stay alive. That is not an answer. Finally, his gray eyes met mine fully. Tired. Careful. Honest in a way I was not prepared for. It is the only one I can promise. Elias moved toward the kitchen slowly. You should go. I turned sharply toward him. Do not start. Maris. He looked genuinely ashamed now. This stopped being your choice once innocent people got dragged into it. That hurt because it matched exactly what I had been thinking since seeing blood on the sidewalk downstairs. Saving one person had already cost too much. The apartment suddenly felt unbearably small around all that guilt. Ronan waited without pressuring me, without touching me, without pretending trust still existed between us after the lie. And somehow that restraint affected me more than control would have. Then my phone buzzed loudly on the counter. Tessa. I answered immediately. Hey. Her breathing sounded shaky. Maris, she whispered. Somebody was outside Owen's school asking questions about you today. I packed my apartment into one duffel bag, while Ronan replaced the broken lock on my front door with his own hands. That was the part one could not stop thinking about later. Not the fear. Not the danger. The fact that the devil of New York sat cross-legged in my narrow hallway at 1 a.m. tightening screws into cheap metal, while Mrs. Delgado argued with police downstairs. He had removed his coat and rolled his sleeves back without saying much. The old lock sat beside him in pieces near his polished shoes. This building should have changed these years ago, he muttered while adjusting the strike plate. The landlord barely fixes heating. Ronan glanced once toward the rattling radiator. I noticed. I stood in my bedroom shoving clothes into a bag mechanically while my mind spiraled around Tessa's phone call. Someone asking questions near Owen's school. Someone following threads leading back to me. I grabbed the framed photo beside my bed automatically before stopping. It showed me, Tessa, and Owen at Coney Island last summer holding melting ice cream cones. Ordinary people. Ordinary life. That picture suddenly felt like evidence from another world. Elias sat quietly at the kitchen table writing something on a torn receipt paper. He looked exhausted in a way deeper than physical injury now. There is a storage locker near Red Hook, he said finally. Unit 214. If something happens to me, there are files inside. Ronan did not look up from the lock. You assume I care. You should. Ronan tightened another screw harder than necessary. You mistake patience for forgiveness. The room went silent again. I zipped my duffel closed harder than intended. Can both of you stop talking like divorced fathers in a crime documentary for 5 minutes? Surprisingly, Elias laughed first. Ronan almost did. Almost. 20 minutes later, we left through the back alley behind the laundromat.
No dramatic convoy.
Just one dark SUV parked near overflowing trash bins and dirty snowbanks piled against the curb. Ronan opened the passenger door for me automatically. The gesture caught me off guard because it felt strangely normal, human, like muscle memory from another life. I can open my own door, I muttered anyway. I know. He waited until I got in before closing it quietly. The inside of the SUV smelled faintly like leather and cedar instead of cigarettes or cologne. The heat vents hummed softly against my frozen hands. Ronan drove himself. No driver. No guards. Elias sat in the back seat silent the entire ride while Queen slid past outside in streaks of red brake lights and shuttered grocery stores. We stopped once at a 24-hour pharmacy in Brooklyn. Ronan went inside alone and returned carrying 2 paper bags. What is this? I asked as he handed one over. Toothbrush. Sweatpants. Contact solution. I blinked at him. You bought me contact solution? You looked uncomfortable wearing glasses all night. That hit harder than it should have. Because nobody noticed things like that unless they paid attention. Too much attention. I looked away quickly and opened the bag. Everything inside was practical. Unscented lotion because my hands cracked during winter shifts. Protein bars. Hair ties. Even the specific tea brand I bought from the clearance shelf at Hartwell. How do you know what tea I drink? I asked quietly. Ronan kept his eyes on the road. You buy the same box every Tuesday. The realization unsettled me deeply. Not because it felt controlling. Worse, because it felt caring. And after everything that happened tonight, I did not know what to do with that anymore. 40 minutes later, the SUV pulled into a narrow side street near the East River.
No mansión. No penthouse.
Just a renovated brick building above an old marine supply store with dim hallway lights and a freight elevator that groaned when it moved. Ronan grabbed my duffel before I could protest and carried it upstairs himself. Inside, the apartment was quiet and strangely plain. Wooden floors, gray couch, bookshelves, a kitchen with dishes drying beside the sink.
No luxury nonsense.
No giant skyline windows. Just a place somebody actually lived in. Ronan set my bag near the couch and disappeared briefly down the hallway. When he returned, he handed me a folded sweatshirt. You can sleep in the bedroom tonight, he said. I will stay out here. I stared at him carefully. You trust me in your apartment after everything? Something tired flickered across his face again. No, he answered honestly. But I still brought you here. I did not sleep much the first night in Ronan's apartment. Every sound pulled me awake. Pipes shifting in the walls. Cars moving outside near the river. The low murmur of Ronan's voice sometime around 3 in the morning, while he spoke quietly on the phone in the kitchen. I stayed perfectly still under unfamiliar blankets, listening to the rhythm of someone carrying too much responsibility without ever putting it down. By 7 I gave up trying to rest entirely. The bedroom smelled faintly like cedar and laundry detergent. No expensive cologne.
No artificial luxury.
Just clean sheets and exhaustion. I padded quietly into the kitchen wearing the oversized sweatshirt Ronan had given me. The sleeves covered half my hands. He stood near the stove in gray sweatpants and a black thermal shirt stirring eggs in a pan while reading something on a tablet propped beside the coffee maker. For a second the image confused my brain. Not because he looked softer. He did not. Ronan Vale still carried danger in the way storms carried lightning. But domestic routines looked strange on him. Human in a way I was not prepared for. He glanced up immediately when he heard me. You should still be sleeping. You say that to everybody or only fugitives and overworked pharmacists? Only the stubborn ones. I leaned carefully against the counter, still unsure what the rules were between us now. You cook. I can survive without restaurants. The eggs smelled good enough to remind me I barely ate yesterday. Ronan noticed the moment I looked at the pan. Without comment he slid a plate toward me. Scrambled eggs. Toast. Orange slices cut neatly beside them. Practical. Quiet. I sat slowly at the kitchen island while he returned to reading reports on the tablet. No forced conversation.
No dramatic emotional confrontation.
Somehow that made the room easier to breathe in. Then I noticed the dark bruising near his wrist when he reached for coffee. What happened there? Ronan looked down briefly like he forgot the bruise existed. Nothing important. That usually means it is important. A small silence passed before he answered. One of Nolan's men tried making a point yesterday. And he failed. The calm way he said it unsettled me because it sounded less like confidence and more like somebody too tired to care about pain anymore. I picked at my toast quietly. I am sorry about your driver. Ronan's hand paused briefly near his coffee cup. Not dramatic. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Louise should have been nowhere near this, he said softly. Guilt crawled up my throat again. Neither should my nephew. Ronan finally looked at me fully then. I moved security near Owen's school this morning. I stared at him. You what? Plain clothes only. They will not approach him. You cannot just put people around my family without asking me. Would you rather I did nothing? I opened my mouth immediately, then stopped. Because honestly I did not know anymore. That was the terrifying part. Ronan watched the conflict move across my face and leaned back slightly against the counter. You do not have to trust me, he said quietly. But let me keep them safe while this gets handled. The words should have comforted me. Instead they made my chest ache with a different kind of fear. Depending on people always came with a cost eventually. I learned that young. You keep acting like you can control all of this, I muttered. I keep trying because the alternative is worse. The honesty landed harder than some grand speech would have. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed across the counter. Hartwell Pharmacy. I answered immediately. Maris, my manager snapped without greeting. DA Compliance is here again. They want statements from everyone connected to the missing inventory. My stomach tightened instantly. Today. Now. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. Real life did not pause just because my emotional stability was collapsing. I will come in. Good, he replied sharply. And Maris? If there is anything going on with you outside work, fix it before corporate decides you are the liability. The line disconnected. I stared down at the phone silently while panic settled fresh beneath my ribs. Ronan watched my expression carefully from across the kitchen. What happened? I laughed once under my breath. Tired. Frayed around the edges. Apparently my normal life is falling apart too. The DA interview lasted 3 hours and accomplished absolutely nothing except giving me a migraine and making me realize how close ordinary life always sat beside disaster. By the time I left Hartwell Pharmacy, my shoulders felt permanently locked from stress. Corporate wanted written statements, inventory logs, security explanations. Nobody officially accused me of anything, but suspicion hung around me now like cigarette smoke in old fabric. I stood outside the pharmacy entrance rubbing my eyes while commuters pushed past carrying grocery bags and takeout containers through the cold Brooklyn evening. My entire body ached with exhaustion. Then I noticed the car parked across the street. Not black SUV dramatic. Just an older dark sedan tucked beside a fire hydrant. Ronan sat behind the wheel reading paperwork under the dim dashboard light like he had been waiting there a while. I crossed the street slowly and opened the passenger door. You stalking me professionally now? He glanced up from the folder in his hands. You look terrible. That is not an answer. It is an observation. I slid into the seat anyway because despite everything, my body relaxed slightly the second the heat hit my frozen hands. That scared me more than it should have. Ronan handed me a paper bag without comment. Inside sat a turkey sandwich, kettle chips, and the green tea I always bought from Hartwell. Still warm. You followed me enough to know my lunch order? I asked quietly. You forget pharmacists eat at the same places every shift. I stared at the sandwich for a second too long before unwrapping it. I hate that this is nice. Ronan started the car slowly. You are allowed to hate me too. The honesty in that made something ache unexpectedly beneath my ribs. We drove without much conversation through streets lined with small grocery stores, churches, and crowded apartment buildings glowing warm against the early dark.
No dramatic soundtrack.
Just windshield wipers squeaking occasionally, and the smell of toasted bread filling the car while I ate, because apparently stress did not cancel hunger. Ronan finally parked near the waterfront beside a closed bait shop and killed the engine. Cargo ships moved slowly across the river in the distance, their lights reflecting against dark water. Why are we here? I asked. Because if you go upstairs right now, he said quietly, you are going to pretend you are fine until you pass out. I leaned my head back against the seat. That is usually how Tuesdays work. Ronan looked out toward the river for several seconds before speaking again. Micah used to bring me here when things got bad. I turned slightly toward him, surprised. He rarely volunteered personal things first. Your brother. He nodded once. We would sit here for hours eating terrible diner fries and pretending we had normal lives. His fingers tapped absently against the steering wheel. He liked places where nobody expected anything from him. I listened quietly because grief sounded different when it was real. Smaller. More tired. Less dramatic than movies made it seem. You still come here? I asked. Not really. Why now? Finally Ronan looked at me.
No walls. No intimidación.
Just exhaustion and something dangerously close to vulnerability sitting behind his gray eyes. Because lately you look like somebody carrying too much alone. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I looked down at the teacup warming my hands. I do not know how to stop doing that. I know. Silence settled between us again, but softer this time. Not empty. Just two damaged people sitting inside a parked car beside freezing water trying to figure out what safety even meant anymore. Then Ronan reached into the back seat and pulled out a small plastic inhaler spacer still inside pharmacy packaging. For Owen, he said quietly. The hospital overcharges for those. I stared at the box in disbelief. You went and bought my nephew medical equipment? You were busy surviving federal audits. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Real laughter this time. Small. Tired. Human. Ronan looked genuinely startled hearing it. Like he had forgotten people could still sound like that around him. The moment lingered awkwardly for a second before I shook my head softly. You know, I murmured. Most people try flowers first. Something warm flickered briefly across his expression. Most people are not hiding my enemy in their apartment. And somehow, despite everything still broken between us, neither of us looked away. Spring reached Brooklyn slowly that year. Dirty snow disappeared first. Then the river stopped looking angry all the time. Then one morning I realized I had not checked over my shoulder walking to work in almost a full week. That was how healing happened sometimes. Quiet enough you missed it while it was happening. Hartwell Pharmacy kept me after the investigation finally closed. No charges. No major findings. Just months of stress, interviews, and corporate lectures about compliance procedures. My manager still watched me differently now. More cautious. Trust did not magically rebuild because paperwork cleared. I understood that. Some things stayed cracked after pressure. Ronan understood that too. He never asked me to move into his apartment. Never tried giving orders about where I worked or who I saw. If anything, he stepped back more after everything with Elias ended. Elias eventually disappeared into federal custody after turning over information connected to Nolan Pike's network.
No cinematic shootout. No dramatic revenge.
Just arrests, sealed files, and news articles people forgot 2 weeks later while regular life kept moving. Ronan lost people during it anyway. One driver retired after the attacks. Another moved his family out of state completely. Damage still counted even when you survived it. Some nights Ronan would sit awake at his kitchen table staring at paperwork long after midnight while the radio played low static beside him. I learned not to push on those nights. He learned not to disappear without texting me first anymore. Small things. Human things. That was the real change. Not declarations. Habits. One rainy Thursday in April, my shift ended early because the pharmacy freezer broke and spoiled half our vaccines. I walked 6 blocks to the marine supply building carrying grocery bags and smelling like disinfectant and exhaustion. Ronan opened the apartment door wearing gray sweatpants and reading glasses low on his nose while holding a screwdriver. The bathroom sink finally gave up, he explained before I could ask. I am losing to a pipe. I laughed softly and kicked off my shoes near the door. Months ago, I would have frozen at the sight of him like this. The devil of New York crouched beneath a sink cabinet with tools scattered across the floor. Now it just felt strangely dear to me. Real. You ate? He asked automatically. Protein bar and regret. That bad? A woman yelled at me for 20 minutes because insurance would not cover cough syrup. Ronan nodded seriously. Terrifying. I dropped onto the couch while he returned to the sink. The apartment smelled like garlic and detergent. Normal life. Quiet life. Hard-earned life. I watched him work silently for a minute before noticing the silver lighter sitting near the toolbox. Micah's lighter. Ronan carried it less like a weapon these days. More like memory. You still wake up sometimes, I said quietly. He tightened something beneath the sink before answering. Yeah. Honest. No pretending trauma vanished because love arrived. Me too, I admitted. Ronan finally looked over at me then. Tired gray eyes. Softer around the edges than they used to be. You know, he said carefully, you could still leave all this someday. Months ago, that sentence would have sounded like rejection. Now I understood what it really was. Freedom. Choice. The thing neither of us had been given enough before. I stood slowly and crossed the kitchen until I was beside him on the floor near the leaking sink. I know, I answered. Then I handed him the wrench lying beside the toolbox because his hands were full, and because sometimes love looked less like possession and more like helping somebody hold things together before they fell apart again. Ronan stared at me for one quiet second before taking the wrench carefully from my hand. Outside, traffic moved through wet Brooklyn streets while pipes rattled softly in the walls and the sink continued dripping between us. Imperfect. Unfinished. Still leaking a little. But no longer breaking apart alone. If this story made your heart race, if you felt the fear in that pharmacy, and if you believed Ronan Vale was dangerous long before he became protective, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and step into the dark with us again. Because some love stories don't begin with flowers. They begin with blood, snow, and one impossible lie.